All right, we're going to do our game preview with Austin Peay. We got Joe Deleone coming in, going to talk all about the Governors. They do have a fantastic logo, by the way, if you're not familiar with Austin Peay. They do have a fantastic logo, but that's about the extent of my knowledge about Austin Peay. Joe, what do I need to know?
I like the one thing you point out is the logo. I am a big fan of the logo too, so I appreciate you shouting that out. But
Mm.
this team is very underrated. I think is what you need to know. We saw six FCS FBS upsets this past week because teams undervalued their upcoming opponent. And the one key thing that I point to is that they are a very effective running team. They have two very good running backs in Ahmad Tanner and then CJ Evans. Then also you can also throw in Jerry and Wilson in there as well. Not to mention the fact that their starting quarterback, Draylon Ellis, is a very great athlete as well.
Yeah, it looks like the team, even that short period of time, took on the identity of Mark Hudspeth with the types of players that was recruited at quarterback and running back. So it's a very much a pre-Billy Napier, Louisiana Lafayette look to the team. And is it a freshman of the year quarterback? Is that correct?
I believe either freshman or he's an underclassman. He's on the younger side. They did
Yeah.
have a couple older guys that worked in there the previous past few years, but Draylon Ellis is definitely a young gun with limited experience, but still a ton of talent.
Okay. And what besides that quarterback and the two running backs, who else do we need to know? Who do we need to see whenever that number pops up? Hey, there's that guy.
Yeah, also you got to talk about their receivers. They lost D'Angelo Wilson to the Western Kentucky team that took all those FCS transfers. They got Bailey Zappi right now, who's thrown for a ton of touchdowns. But it seems like that they're not going to have much trouble replacing him. Benico Harley in their first game against Chattanooga, 6 receptions for 137 yards and a touchdown. He's probably their best receiver just based off of experience and what we saw in that first game against Chattanooga. So if anyone just out of nowhere has like a big reception or has a touchdown reception at any point, it's probably going to be him.
Okay, it's good to know. And basically, if we're talking about this game on Sunday, this a disaster happened for Ole Miss. Um, I mean, just honestly, but
Right. No, you're not wrong.
yeah, but it's obviously a good program. I know they had the little bit of turmoil. What happened with the Mark Hudspeth thing?
I don't 100% know like recall the full story just because it was relatively far back. But I from what I do remember with Mark Hudspeth, it was just a matter of like a quick turnover. I forget if it was partially COVID related, but I remember it was right before the start of the season last year, before everything got completely shut down. And it seems like they're doing fine without him, and hopefully they can have some success without him as well.
All right, let's do a little bit of around the FCS and talk about what conference is the Austin P in. Who are the other teams in there? Who are some names of teams that people might recognize?
Yeah, they're playing in the Ohio Valley Conference, and that is one of the better conferences in FCS. They put out usually 2 to 3 teams to the FCS playoff every single year. So, talking about Austin Peay, that they're always in contention at the top. Southeastern Missouri has had a tendency to occasionally put out a couple guys to the NFL. Jacksonville State right now seems to be the top squad. They had an FBS upset during last fall when there was some limited game action, and I believe that they had a pretty good week one in the game that they played, but things got away from them a little bit when they played UAB. But some of the other names I think people might recognize: Eastern Kentucky has put out some players to the NFL, and then obviously the most recognizable being Eastern Illinois, which Jimmy Garoppolo's alma mater, where he went and played. He won the Walter Payton Award while he was the starting quarterback there. They're not as good as they were when Jimmy Garoppolo was there right now, but still some quality football programs in the Ohio Valley Conference.
Yeah, is that Tony Robo and Sean Payton and all those guys?
Yep, that was also Tony Romo as well back when I believe he also won the Walter Payton, but the same university that produced Romo and Jimmy Garoppolo.
Okay, and how well are the Austin P faithful going to travel to Oxford? How many people can we expect?
In terms of fans, I mean, this is a pretty big deal for them to be going and playing Ole Miss. And I was a college football player at the University of Rhode Island, and when we traveled to play Virginia Tech, like even though we didn't take a lot of fans really to many games, a lot of people showed out when we went to Virginia Tech just because of relative close location where people could travel within 10 hours. It was just a big deal. The fans and alumni of the university, even though we were really struggling that year, we're just excited to see that we were going to go play there. So, like, I think Austin Peay in a typical game might not necessarily pack the stands, but this is a game that has just a ton of importance where they can kind of expect that it's probably not going to go in the Governor's favor, but at the very least that they can be excited to go out there and watch them play against a really strong SEC program.
Yeah, and you get to see the Grove and all the other stuff that they've heard about
Right.
but never got to actually experience. So, what kind of a year is Austin Peay supposed to have this year? How are they looking going forward at the FCS level?
Yeah, they based on the way that they have bounced back since COVID, which it's really hindered the trajectory, I think, for a lot of teams, just because like any team that was doing well in 2019 lost a lot of their big name players to transfers. They've been practicing for a really long time. They still retain some pretty good talent on their roster. So they are going to be in contention to win that Ohio Valley. The only real road bump that they have is beating out Jacksonville State, but they don't even face them this season, which is obviously an advantage. So it's just going to be a matter of who has the best record at the end of the season. If I were just to project here, I think Austin Peay is the easier record, just based on taking a quick glance at both of them. But they're going to be finishing top two just because of the quality of the opponents on their schedule.
Okay. And FCS played in the spring, so the quick turnaround. Are they playing a normal schedule in the fall? How
Yeah,
does that look?
it is a normal schedule, which is pretty crazy to be to be expecting them to come around, turn around, and play essentially. I think it's like a 9 or a 10 game schedule. It's tough for a lot of these teams, and you have some of these teams that play the national championship game in the playoffs. It's a super quick turnaround because you go from middle of May ish to then having to go to camp in, I think most teams started early August, maybe mid-August to give them a little bit more time to recover. And then here you are in the start of September, you're playing football games. I'm worried that there might be some guys that deal with some injuries, but the one thing that has been an advantage for these FCS programs is that guys that have transferred out during spring ball have come to these FCS programs, and they've, a good amount of them have been pretty productive in the first week. But yeah, no, it's a very tough, difficult turnaround because you're basically playing. It was 7 games in the spring, and now here we are. They're playing a full normal fall schedule.
Okay, that's interesting. Also, with all the expansion that's going on in college football right now, with Texas and Oklahoma coming to the SEC and the Big 12 about to expand, it's always going to cascade. There's a chance that FCS games are going to start dwindling at the Power 5 level. Now, do you see a future maybe where FCS programs become the de facto spring games of these power programs?
I don't know if necessarily they'll become the spring games, but the one thing that was a really underrated storyline in the first week of football action last week, why we had 6 FCS upsets. That typically doesn't happen. I think people don't realize, like I was just saying, how many guys from these bigger FBS programs, some of them coming from Power 5 programs, transferred down to go play at the FCS level because they just want to get on the field, or they didn't get the offers that they thought they were going to get when they entered the transfer portal. So I think that there's going to be still some good talent at the FCS. I don't think anything's going to really fall apart or disappear for these FCS teams. I do agree that a lot of FBS programs, especially the power conferences, might not schedule these games much anymore because they need their full schedule to look good. But if they want like a quick, easy win, maybe you can still do that. I just don't think that these might be as much of a layup for some weaker teams in some of these power conferences as they were previously. Like we saw that with Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, and I had an interaction with somebody on social media who assumed that ETSU was going to be a walkover game for them, and they lost to ETSU. So I think we could possibly see some more of that if these games continue to get scheduled.
Yeah, and the Fighting Randy Sanders at ETSU. So, are they the Moccasins or is that Chattanooga?
That's I think Chattanooga. I think that's Chattanooga, not
Okay.
ETSU. I forget what ETSU
I,
stands
I
for off
lived
the top
in
of
I
my head.
lived in Tennessee for close to a decade, so I should have all these directional schools and FCS schools, the nicknames
Right.
memorized. But ETSU, for whatever reason, just was always at the bottom of the list. I'm more likely to know UT Martin and Austin Peay than ETSU. I mean, it's just they're just out in the sticks.
Right, and they're always an interesting program because like you never really expect much from them, and then they'll have like a random NFL quality player. Like they had this year player a couple of years ago. Quay Holmes this year's the big name player for them, but it's just such a small program that occasionally puts out some good talent.
All right, all right. Before I let you go, give me the top five teams in FCS to look at this year.
Uh, yep. In no particular order, the ones that really caught my eye, especially after this first week, is South Dakota State dominating Colorado State. They didn't really lose anything. They've got a really good transfer quarterback in Chris Oladokin, formerly South Florida and Samford, and now he's playing for the Jackrabbits. North Dakota State always has to be in the conversation. James Madison always in that conversation. They didn't really lose a whole lot. They got an Ohio State transfer. They got a Towson transfer, Eastern Michigan transfer. Montana, the way that they played against Washington, has to be discussed as well. And then Sam Houston State, no doubt, who were the previous national champions. And again, similar to some of these other programs, didn't really lose a whole lot since the spring, so they're returning a lot of experienced players.
All right, everybody, go check out Joe Deleone. He's in the Believe Podcast Network. He does all the FCS stuff. You can listen to him there, and he has all kind of FCS information. Just because we're playing Austin Peay, you're paying attention now, but giving him a listen outside of that. Follow the season because see what they got 30 teams in their playoff or something like that. And I mean,
24.
24 teams in their playoff, and it turns into a pretty interesting thing. We're talking about going up to 12 in the FBS. Well, you can see the future if you look at the FCS. But thank you, Joe. Hope to have you back on sometime, and we can talk some more FCS football because it's just fun.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on, and always excited to talk FCS. So just let me know.
All right. Take care, bud.
Thanks.